My name's Anna Lane. I am the CEO of the Wisdom Council. You probably wouldn't be able to work out what I do if you looked in the book, because it wasn't very self-explanatory, but we are consumer engagement specialists. And thank you very much for we actually was listening to the earlier talk, thinking it's set up beautifully what this panel is about. What I'm going to do is, I'm actually going to let everybody introduce themselves when I ask them questions, but just to mention, I've obviously got with me, I've got Max from Finimize, Pete down at the end there. Pete said to me the only thing people are going to want to know is which person is correlates to which name. And then we've got Daniel Thompson here from Lloyd and Tal from Vitality. Everybody here has got slightly different experience and expertise when it comes to engaging consumers digitally. What I thought I would do just to kick off is just to talk about a project that Tal and I are involved in. And I think because it touches on probably quite a few things that have been discussed today and yesterday, and combines consumer co-creation, innovation and technology to try to solve an issue. I'll just kick off about it, and then I want to hand over to the first question. So we are working on a project called Yes She Can. Some of you might have heard about it, and it's got two things we're focusing on. So first of all, you've got this dichotomy of a critical social issue that women don't engage with finance, and certainly things like an average woman's pension in the UK would be a fifth of a man's on retirement, and 70% of women will die alone. That's a horrible stat, really horrible stat. But actually, the flip side, if you're an entrepreneur, and the Wisdom Council is my business, I founded it, and I'm an entrepreneur, it's a majority-owned female business, there's some amazing, amazing stats in terms of the opportunity of engaging more women, and that is female wealth creation is on the up. You've got more female millionaires under 44 in the UK. Women will control 55% of all wealth, 2025, more women working. So you've got this great stats here, and then these really dire stats over here. And what this project then is, there's some brilliant research that's out in, I think, a lot of financial services companies. I'd particularly, reference someone like Fidelity. Done some brilliant work here. Scottish Widows have as well. There's a lot of research out there, but the reality is not much is changing. If clients looked at the percentage of assets that they have through female customers or female private clients, not much is changing. And we just thought, okay, if you take a step back, and a lot of people will talk about the threat of non-financial services consumer challenges coming into our industry, and I think it's very, very real. Certainly the CEOs are all talking about Amazon being the next big passive player. We just thought, well, if you look at this challenge, what would Netflix and Amazon do? How would they approach it? Because there's big societal reasons why more women aren't saving, investing, lack of role models, lack of female advisors, but it's a massive commercial opportunity. And all the women that we speak to are really sassy, really powerful. 75% of them want to have their own business. They see themselves as strong, empowered. And you've got an industry that talks to them about the fact they don't take risks and they lack a lot of confidence. Well, that's actually not true. So the project that we're working on combines consumer co-creation, so working with women, design thinking, all of that, behavioral science, obviously you're far more capable of this than me, as well as technology using bots and digital engagement to engage people at scale. Some of the early stuff that I guess we found out is that 9 out of 10 women have never thought about investing. It's not a barrier. They never thought about it. So they turned up into a room and no one's ever spoken to them about it. And 80% of women don't think anyone like them is investing. So the thing about women is, most of you know, is that the friends and family network is critically important, and one of the biggest predictors of somebody investing is if they were encouraged to invest by their friends and family network. Most women have not been encouraged, 90%, and they don't think people like them invest. So when you talk about, the industry talks about the barriers women face, the lack of confidence that they have, and by the way, when they invest, they're just as good as men. You were saying they were better, actually, weren't you? You could say that. But so the rhetoric that the industry is using basically makes them seem like it's not for them. What we're trying to do is to say, if you were Amazon or Netflix, you do know how to engage women because you're highly successful. And what we hear, and I don't know, I'd be interested to know if anybody else hears, what we hear is that the default good customer service now is Amazon and Amazon Prime. We're in a subscription economy. The consumer expects a subscription experience. How does that play down with everybody's financial propositions? 75 to 90% drop-off rates on Robo propositions. So I just want to throw it out there, just start off with something nice and controversial. The point is it's a combining consumer co-creation and technology. So this is about engaging, but it's about trying to understand how other industries who are adept at engaging actually manage to do it. enough about me. This thing about an entrepreneur, it's always about you. Right, and to the questions. Apparently, people can submit questions through the app. Is that right? Yeah, so we might get to them or we might not. We want it to be nice and relaxed, don't we? Yes, I keep looking at Pete like he's a relaxed person. Right, the next thing I have to do is to find my glasses because I'm also blind. And we thought we'd start with one of our, I think you've seen there's some bullets that we're potentially going to talk about, but we quite like this one because it was a bit controversial. So I'm going to ask you, Tal, because I know you want to just get this out of the way. So does money represent a means to financial security or fuel a passion? And if you could just also talk about yourself and your role when you start.
Okay, so I've been working with Vitality for about 6 years now, and my experience with the invest space is about 1 year. So I am new to this category. So I'm probably one of these women that Anna has mentioned, and everything. So I'm coming at this from a perspective that I am here to be educated, but also what I have become is, I guess, very conversant with the Vitality brand and very interested in how they're applying their model to the financial services space. So I'm sure most of you realize that Vitality launched their Invest proposition about 1 year ago, or just over 1 year ago. So the first question you were going to ask?
Right. Does money represent a means to financial security or does it fuel a passion?
Right. So my answer to that would be both. And that just to think about, firstly, a few months ago, I attended some training on pensions. And the first thing that the trainer did was to ask us to list out all of the expenses we'd expect to have in our retirement and to work out an annual salary that we would need to survive. Without fail, every single one of us forgot about things like our subscriptions to Netflix and to Amazon. We forgot about that we might actually need to wear some clothes in the future. That we
Shame
also
on you.
that we also might want to take more than one holiday a year, thinking that actually that's how we all live now. And also, most importantly, is that we had forgotten about the interests and the passions that we have in our life now and how we might want to take those into our future. So Vitality has actually highlighted this and shown this, that through a digital app that they have developed, that when we collected over 6,000 respondents, and in analysing their response, we saw that the average age that people expect to retire at is around about 63. Now, the reality for everyone is that in fact very, very different. For men, the average amount of money that they would have would mean that they'd have to retire at 73. And the picture for women is even greater. It's 16 years gap. It's 79 that they would be able to retire. So this is what has made us so interested in working with the Wisdom Council and our other financial partners on the Yes She Can initiative that has been mentioned by Anna. Because when in this initiative, we've seen that on analysis of about 1,000 different responses, that 66% of uninvested women have said that they've never even considered investing. And of course, these women also have pensions, but they haven't even thought about their pensions. So we look at the industry statistics, we know that about 892,000 women only 892,000 women have ISAs. We also know that women, on average, when they get to between 60 and 64, they have 75% less savings than the average man. And this amount is actually about £36,000, so really not really enough for more than 2 years. So there's a huge issue that needs to be addressed, and it also represents a huge opportunity commercially for the whole industry. So in participating in some of the workshops around Yes She Can, I've had the privilege of talking to some of these 160 women that we've had really in-depth conversations with. And what we noticed about these women is that they're really ambitious, that they all want to make their future lives better, and actually a large portion of them want to also own their own business. So they're passionate, they have interests, they have things that they want to do. The other thing that this initiative has highlighted, and that is particularly close to, I guess, Vitality's heart, is that there are 5 overarching themes that dominate women's lives. And one of these themes is the increasing preventative approach to health and well-being. And this is really Vitality's heartland. This is at the core of our proposition. In terms of developing the INVEST proposition, we recognise the inseparability of both financial health and our mental and physical health. And so we've developed a proposition which financially incentivizes people to start saving sooner, to save for longer, to also take action to be healthy and take steps to be healthy, and also to more carefully draw down on their pension. So in doing so, Vitality are looking at how they can lengthen their retirement in such a way where people are able to carry out their passions and live their passions throughout their retirement because they have the health to enjoy it.
Cool. Thank you very much. Very comprehensive, I have to say. Does anybody else on the panel, would you like to comment on this sort of overarching piece about, whether money represents financial security or fuels a passion? I'm looking at you, Pete. Yeah. And you can just obviously introduce yourself and talk a bit about your role.
I'll do that first. I'm going to claim to have one of the coolest jobs in finance because I get to care about how people actually make their financial decisions and hopefully help people make them a little bit better. So the title that's on there is actually one that's just changing. So I have been head of behavioural finance at Barclays for the last 3 years, been in Barclays for about 12 and a half. And I managed to get the chance to rewrite my job profile, so I called myself the Chief Behavioural Scientist for all of Barclays.
Sounds very cool.
So, yeah. So my role has got cooler, but it basically gives me the opportunity to try and apply behavioural sciences and what we know from both the academic and the research side to how most people face their day-to-day money decisions. And you're probably not going to get too much dissent that the answer to the question about is it about security or desires is probably for most people a bit of both. We all know that money is an enabler to many of people's desires, but the primary concern that many people have is that trade-off between the two. Do I go and overindulge myself with my desires at a point where I should be focusing on the financial security? And that's a tension that you see that many people have, particularly in a world where keeping up with the Kardashians because you're seeing people's lifestyles on social media is a real challenge to many people. They see lifestyles that are aspirational and want to go and try and get them. And you're absolutely right to point out the effect of financial well-being as well. Looking back, a few years since we sort of did a real deep dive into financial well-being, this isn't an issue that just affects people on lower incomes. This is an issue that affects people at all income levels. We will find people who have what most people in this country would consider to be very good salaries, whose lifestyles have expanded to take every penny of it up, and they're not making financial progress and not becoming more secure. And yet when you ask them what they think of their own financial well-being, there's a massive positive correlation between the amount of that emergency savings that they have that just creates the emergency buffer and frees up the ability to then think about other financial issues. So irrespective of income level, having that sort of base level of financial security through savings is super, super important for all individuals and their sense of well-being. And then, this sort of follow-on piece of research that we did that links to that is many individuals will take time out of the workplace because of financial stress-related illnesses. That they get themselves in financial circumstances where they do physically need time off. It is one of the triggers to people's mental health problems. And we have a role as an industry to help people do that better, I think. It's a challenge that we perhaps haven't quite got there to. Now, some of that's going to be digital engagement because we know people are going and working with apps much more, and we need to tackle that, and that's the way we're going to deliver our sort of content, our knowledge, our help at scale to many individuals. So hopefully that tees up a little bit of the rest of the conversation.
Yeah, it does. That's very useful. Actually, Max, we kind of got the sort of generic piece about, financial security and passions and everything. And we've started to touch on also some of the conversation we had earlier on around actually some of the generational piece. Anybody who does research with Millennials or Gen Z will know that mental health is something that people talk about a lot. There's so much more permission to talk about it. But can you talk a little bit just about, I think, about Finimize and how you're kind of approaching this, whether it's passions or security and finance, and how you're doing it differently?
Of course. So I'm Max. I work for Finimize. So Finimize, I guess the way that we're different is that when we looked at the financial landscape, what we saw was a need for a brand that actually empowers its users. So we have this mission of empowering all of our users to be able to act as their own financial advisor. Now we do that by empowering them with the information and tools they need to make the informed decisions for themselves. Now that consists of our daily newsletter. I don't know if anyone subscribes, but 3 minutes a day, it explains the top 2 financial stories that are going on in the world, whether that is macroeconomic or single stock movement. That now reaches 500,000, I guess typically Henrys, but our audience is far more diverse than that. So 500,000 around the world are reading this newsletter every day. We recently launched our app that is focused around small bite-sized educational content. That was recently voted Apple's App of the Day. And finally, what we do that's very different is we're a community-first brand. Now, I've never worked at a company before that has such an engaged following. To put this in perspective, I think as of last weekend, we hit our milestone of our users themselves that are across the entire globe have hosted finance events, workshops, meetups to talk about finance, personal investing, educate each other in over 25 different countries. We've had 5,000 attendees to that in the last 6 months. So we're really seeing that the power is in this offline engagement and engaging around topics that people care about. Whether that is Tesla's stock price has fallen, and we're using that hook of that Tesla stock price falling to then deep dive into educational content around how funds are put together or how companies are valued, what that might mean for you. So really we're moving back up the funnel because I think frictionless has already happened. Frictionless investing is possible. To open a diversified, low-cost portfolio with a minimum amount of investment in a matter of minutes, that's already doable. The real challenge is this engagement, because Robo advice has been around for 5, 6, 7 years now, and I haven't seen a shift in the number of people actually investing. So what Finimize is doing is really focusing on why that is. And what we have seen is by educating our audience, they're then empowered to go and take action. And the problem that we're solving is that the current way to do that is our users before were going on to Google, trying to Google investing. They were reading marketing brochures from financial firms that at the end of that, the advice was to go and open up a product with that specific firm. So they were losing the trust, they were getting lost in information overload, and ultimately that resulted in choice paralysis, which I think everyone in the room knows doing nothing is the worst thing that they can do.
Thank you very much. Daniel, I haven't forgotten you. Actually, I think, because we've started talking about millennials, we've also talked about women. Let's talk about segmentation, because actually you'd made the point earlier on, sir, that is segmentation valid? We've got one of the things that we were thinking about saying is, should we avoid stereotypes? Because you've got a segmentation role. Should we avoid stereotypes around millennials, Gen Z, boomers, etc., and focus on behaviours? Max has started to talk about kind of passions. What's your view on that, and how are you going to be approaching that in your role? If you can just say a bit about what you do.
Sure. Daniel Thompson, Head of Segmentation at Lloyds Banking Group. I probably shouldn't be in the role if I didn't agree that we should segment customers, but doing that in a way that makes it easier for customers to relate to the propositions that we develop. I think the group is on a journey from kind of traditional product silos and current accounts, savings, investments, pensions, to more focusing on the customer needs, and kind of we've adopted a lifestyle or life stage approach. But whether someone is kind of having their first child at 25 or having their first child at 42, actually their needs at that time of their life are going to be similar. So the only way to be able to deliver more personalized propositions to customers is to focus down on those needs at that time and engage customers in what's relevant to them at their life stage. And I think the industry has a job to do to move away from investing is risky. It's not for this person. almost everyone in the country is invested through their pension. Most people probably don't realise it. And actually, when you start that conversation, and I suppose the challenge for digital engagement and institutions such as ourselves is how do we have a one-on-one conversation with almost everyone in the country? And that's kind of, I think, where digital engagement can come in, and actually would welcome Amazon coming into financial services, because it's going to increase the level of conversation. People are going to start talking about it. And Lloyds Bank recently launched the M-word campaign, is how do we get people to have that conversation? And as an Australian, although with a slightly British accent, the conversation about money doesn't happen in this country as it does in other countries. The US is probably a more extreme example, where everyone's talking about their 401k and their broker. Probably slightly less in Australia, but the conversation just isn't here. And as a society, I think we do need to do a lot more to start having those conversations, because people are retiring later. People are having a more drawn out kind of phased retirement, but also people who are now retired can't look at their parents for how long they expect to live, because their parents are still alive and they've got kids and possibly even grandkids. They need to look 2 generations back, and therefore people are underestimating how long they're going to live for. And if you're kind of expecting to retire at 62, you could spend almost as long in retirement as you have spent working, and you've kind of bought a house and you bought a car and you've done lots of things. Actually, have you got enough time, and have you thought about what you're going to need in retirement to get you through to the end of life, or to your legacy that you're going to pass on?
Thank you very much. I think it's a very interesting point about the segmentation piece, and I think I'd echo something that Tal picked up on. So in the project that we've been doing at the moment, yes, what is very apparent is how ambitious women are. And as I said, actually, this isn't just a female thing. So it used to be, when you think about talking about money, certainly being an entrepreneur would be difficult historically. The UK never really rated or valued entrepreneurs that were self-made. I think they've got an awful lot of criticism. That seems to have changed dramatically. If you look at the success of some of the things like the Kardashians brands, this is very reflected in this BFF kind of girlfriend brands, this social media rhetoric, but also thinking about yourselves and your children if you've got them. And the side hustle is so huge now. So obviously that side hustle is when you have your main job and then you sell something online. So, my daughter is 14, her side hustle is Depop. Her main job is to be a schoolgirl and to work hard and pass her exams, as opposed to be a Depop entrepreneur. But she's an entrepreneur. She's like an e-commerce entrepreneur. Practically anybody in this country. And actually, when I say 30 or 35 and under, that's actually deeply ageist, because the fastest growing group of millionaire turnover businesses from Amazon and eBay are over 60-year-olds in North East. When you think about finance and how finance communicates with these people, and it's exactly what you're saying about a mother could be 25, a mother could be 45, or in fact there's one Indian woman that's now, 75. They've got a common set of things that are interesting to them, but on the face of it, you wouldn't actually, if you look at fuzz segmentation. So I think it's very, very interesting to think about it. What's your view from a behavioural point of view? Because how much do things group? And if you think about, we were talking about gender earlier on, but anything in terms of gender.
From having seen it used, I think it's very often it's lazy shorthand.
Yeah.
I was in a meeting last week, and somebody threw out this phrase that we're seeing this because it's millennial attitudes.
Yeah.
I have no idea what on earth they were talking about. They were just like throwing that out there like it was useful for people to be tagged in such a way. But I can see why it's really appealing for businesses, because if you do at least go, millennials, Gen X, Gen Y, baby boomers, whatever, you're arbitrarily cutting an age group into a group that may or may not be somewhat like each other, but they're non-overlapping.
No.
When you start to describe life stages and other ways of segmenting people, whether it be a segment related to high growth entrepreneurs and families and retirees, and you may keep a millennials focus in there particularly if you're a core banking group, because there's a group that may or may not have more tech adoption earlier, and you may have a very specific focus on them. They're completely overlapping groups. They become very difficult as a business to create a segmentation and a marketing plan and an engagement plan that actually is coherent for everybody. You know, you could have the same consumer being battled from lots of different directions. But from a behavioural point of view, I think, you know, Daniel's absolutely right. You see people, you know, demonstrate the same kind of behaviours, the same kind of needs based upon life stage much more than you do based upon you know, very simple age-type segmentation processes.
Interesting. Thank you very much. Tal, have you got a view on all of that? We were talking a bit about passions and you know how vitality. I think that's one of the things they do, tapping into the sort of like health and wellness and the sort of zeitgeist and all of that. Have you got a view in terms of, you know, you've got an advertising role, how then that influences, you know, that type of segmentation, how you approach it?
So I guess we've been really just focused on, when we look at our vitality base, we have really a heartland of member who are between the ages of about 35 to 45, which is probably the key age for investments. We're also conscious that we are drawing in a much younger group of people. And so this younger group of people are also, we're encouraging them. They're not necessarily particularly active, even though our whole proposition is built around health and wellness. These people that come into us as members are not necessarily people who were well or feeling particularly active when they joined us. However, we're also learning about how we can, through simple nudges, create people who are more and more interested in being active.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you very much. Max, so you've what's very interesting, I think, about Finimize is that you started off as sort of fintech. You've really started to do more in person. How are you coping with a sort of piece about education and literacy, and how are you making the content of what you do appealing? Are your users generating? How are you managing getting them to engage with it? Because you keep talking about education, and obviously a big part about digital engagement is, you know, educate, inspire me, make it relevant.
Yeah, I think two things. I think the first thing, which might be a point of interest, is when we started out, the ambition was never just to start a newsletter. You know, it was always to build this company that you know, empowers its users. You've seen Headspace do it with mental well-being. You've seen Nike do it with physical well-being. There must be space for a company to do that with financial well-being. And we initially built a Robo product. We had 50,000 people on that product. The idea was open banking play, pulls in your transactions, spits out recommendations that when we thought were timely nudges, you could build your own financial plan and it would constantly update. So 50,000 users on that. And we built it with our audience. It's what they were telling us they wanted. We probably listened to the fintech crowd a little bit too much there. We killed the product before rolling it out. The reason that we killed the product is because we saw the people coming in that were telling us that they wanted this product, this is what they were looking for. When they went home, they would never engage. You know, that was where we started to think, okay, cool, are we trying to sell products? Are we trying to get them to use our platform? Or are we looking for better outcomes for our users? And then what we noticed was these offline meetups, when people met each other in person, or when people went away and educated themselves about fees, what was important about fees, what to look for in a provider, or even, you know, why they should start caring about this now. Then the percentage of people that took action in their financial lives was far, far higher. So we ditched this prescriptive approach, and I think this is where we, again, are differentiating how we're communicating with our audience. Finance suffers from talking down to its audience. You know, you can blame regulation, the fact that everyone is very you have to pass qualifications to give advice. But simply, how hard is it for someone to open a diversified low-cost portfolio? Do you need to be an expert in investment management? And I think if we can get that message across, that it isn't that hard, it isn't that difficult, but it's a journey of education along the whole way, we found that that's the change that needs to happen in the world. So we don't try and, you know, catch people at the right time. We just create the content, and it's up to them to explore. We just make sure the content that we have, they find valuable and relevant. The other point is 500,000 people that we engage with every single morning of the day, every single morning of the week. We get constant feedback from them. Another thing that we do very differently to the traditional finance firms, I'm more than happy to ping 5,000 people an email saying, hey, it's Max, you know, how come you stopped using our product? Or did you find this interesting? Did you see we've recently switched to an audio first version? You know, that level of engagement from our audience is huge. And again, benefits of being a startup, sorry to rub it in, but we make those changes within a week. So I think that's how we built it. We built it with our customers, for our customers, and we really focused on, are we getting better outcomes for our clients, rather than are we selling our own product, which I think some traditional players may struggle with.
Okay, interesting. Daniel, how do you, if you talk about your role now, obviously by default you do have to think about segmentation. I would actually say that lots of, again, we've been talking to lots of women recently, but you do hear that they want things that are personalised, and common sense says to personalise a journey you have to make some assumption. So you do hear that, and they say that they don't feel like big companies talk to them as individuals. So everybody, the thing that we hate, actually all consumers are talking about the company that they really hate is Sky, because they're fed up with having to the only way that you're going to get a better deal with Sky is to say, basically you call up and they say you've got to say your husband died, you're dying, or you're getting divorced. That's the only way that they're going to give it to you. And then people hate the customer satisfaction text back 1, 2, 3. So they definitely do want personalisation, and obviously that means you do need to do segmentation strategies. But have you got any particular way you would be looking at or working with customers, tailoring content, user-generated content? How do you go about that, and sort of especially in your new role?
Yes, I think, the challenge with any large organisation is how do you do that at scale? So, to ping out an email might take 3 or 4 weeks because you've got to talk to this team, and then their backlog's full, and then you've got to sign off by risk and legal, things like that. The benefit is when we do push something out, then it goes out to millions of people, and you can really make a large impact. But you've kind of just got to accept that it's an oil tanker, and it takes a while to turn. I mean, in terms of personalisation, and I suppose one of the benefits of kind of taking a segmented or moving towards, I don't think we'll ever get to a segment of one, but if we can understand more about customers and what they do engage with, then we can personalise it more. And it is about the language that you use. It is about kind of how you engage with that person. So we could create some digital content, which would be great, but how do you serve that to someone who comes into the branch once a week, or who calls up telephone banking? Not everyone is on the app 3 or 4 times a day. There are a large number of people, but it's around serving kind of, I suppose, the right content to the right people at the right time. And yes, you can't always get that right, and sometimes you need to make it discoverable and allow them to engage at the time they want. But it is around changing the language, I think, that we use, and simplifying it. Too much investment content is written by investment people for investment people. But actually, why invest in the first place is probably the first question that we need to answer to engage a larger section of the population.
So I think just on that point, which I think is a fantastic point, I think in the future, obviously I believe in community, but I don't know if anyone has seen giffgaff's customer service model. So it's user-driven and user-run, and there are certain rewards for people responding. The speed of response to any question, I believe they've got down to within 2 minutes. And if you think of the millions of customers they have over the world, it's users responding with their experiences. So there are companies that are solving this person-to-person contact at large scale. Very difficult in finance.
Cool, thank you. It's interesting to know how you then, so if you think from a behavioural point of view, because one of the things that everybody knows is that actually just saying you're going to do something doesn't mean you're going to do it. So what are the sorts of nudges and techniques, given that this panel is also about how you use technology? Someone like Barclays, and we were talking earlier on some of the nudges and things that you look in techniques. How can you sort of go from user-generated content to make things more appealing and relevant and actually changing behaviour or influencing behaviour in a positive way?
Yeah, so Daniel kind of touched on that topic a little bit, that there are different types of behaviours that are easier and tougher to do that with. So, a lot of the research over the years in behavioural finance and behavioural economics more broadly has shown that education has a role to play, but it's not really that useful. In the time where I get to being in an emotional, hot-handed state, and I'm going to make a decision that, temptation, my desires are taken over maybe, rather than my need for financial security, I'm going to make that decision because my ability to recall the education of what I should do is really low. And technology hasn't been around in order to push anything out to you in that moment. But now we have, the ability with computing to do real-time analytics much better than we could previously. We have, through apps and smartphones, the ability to push notify you in the moment if we can use that information. I can use machine learning because I can then decide, how am I going to frame that nudge in order to create the best personalization. So I might have one insight, but I might have to write it 15 different ways, and my machine might have to be able to tell me, which one's the most effective based upon what I know you do. Whether that's your time of using it, whether it's the channel of your choice, whether it's a particularly authoritative tone, whether it's a friendly tone, whether it's imagery, what all the things that I have in my toolkit to change, and then push it out to you, in a timely way. I don't think anyone's even close to being able to do that yet. In any industry, let alone finance. But if you think the regulation and the compliance sign-offs that the big tech players would need to go through in order to deliver that, we're not quite there. But you can go and do some of these other nudges in content generation around other behaviours that are a bit more static. We've noticed the need for you to perhaps think about how much you're saving. Could you save more? You told us you've got a long-term goal, or you appear to be saving for the long term, and this money's quite static. Are you doing the most for it? These are the kind of things. And if in the investing sense, we see an awful lot of clients through our execution-only platform who come in and maybe they've had a stock plan through their work, or they've done the thing that most people do, and they start and they just buy the familiar name and they hold a single stock for a bit. And we'd go, actually, that's probably taking the sharpest knife out of the drawer as a beginner. Maybe we want to try and educate you. We know if we don't try and educate you, you'll probably hold that for the next 15 or 20 years. It'll either work for you or it won't. You just happen to pick Apple rather than British Energy. And you end up with that trying to create a segment, perhaps. You can identify those individuals. You can create a targeted content plan that maybe hits them over 2 or 3 weeks, and try and then track the ability to change that behavior. Do people actually do? You do have that feedback loop. That's one of the big things you do get. You can see, do people take action? And from my point of view as a sort of behavioural specialist is, I'm not going to write just one version of that content.
You're going to A/B. You're going
to do a lot of A/B testing if I can, and the ability to move quick enough with A/B testing and iterate. If I get a chance to do it again and again and again. It's one of the exciting things, a little bit outside of the investing world, but in certainly how credit card debt management is kind of pushing with the persistent debt rules. You're constantly in contact with these individuals who fall into that definition of persistent debt, and it's a very, very quick iteration type experiment that will eventually come to investing. Not quite there yet, I don't think, but something, whether it be a regulatory change like persistent debt, will force it upon us, or just we'll find a real issue that we want to go at like a dog with a bone, and you'll get that quick cycle.
Oh, cool, excellent. Now I think we are at time. I think we're due to finish around now. We've got a couple of minutes. There don't seem to be any questions on the. Oh, right. Who can read that, Pete? So we've got a couple of questions here. It's which one. So how do we make people take responsibility for their own fate? As most people realise too late, they have no savings. That's really, really interesting. What are your thoughts about the issue of how people respond to profiling? Question is, well, it's interesting. Who were the Henrys, Max? Right. If you answer who the Henrys are, Max, then let's you guys, Pete, and have a crack at this. Do you want to start with the Henrys?
Sure. So the Henrys subscribe to Finimize. If there are any Henrys in the room, you should be on there. But just to segue that into the first question about how do we make people take responsibility, I guess what we've noticed from our demographic, and these, like I said, these Henrys, these Finimize subscribers, these are affluent, well-educated. The constant narrative that I heard when I was working in wealth management was millennials don't have money, so why bother? The average salary of our audience is £120,000. And that's $500,000. The average age is 25 to 40. So these are smart, affluent people that have money and want to invest, yet still struggle to make it through that journey. What's interesting about that audience is we found their initial contact with investing is through, as you referred to, the sharpest tool in the drawer, crypto, crowdfunding, and single stocks. That is like their baptism of fire. Now, what we are noticing that, again, is different, and I think because we're approaching this from an empowerment standpoint and not saying, well, you're wrong and you're stupid for doing that, is that it's our role to take them from that standpoint all the way through to building a well-diversified and balanced portfolio.
Just take I'll take the first one.
Go for it, just go for it.
I think it's beholden on all of us within the industry, as well as government. I mean, we've seen over the last, I suppose, 10 years, a big shift from the state to personal responsibility. We've got auto enrollment, we've got things like that to provide some level of support, but there are probably a large number of people out there who are contributing to their company pension scheme, but haven't seen that big button that says free money, that if you increase your personal contributions, then most large companies will match or even go beyond that. And it's about starting or continuing that conversation in society, in small communities, where you can have a one-on-one conversation, where people can ask the stupid question of, what's a fund, or why should I invest in an ISA? I remember sitting in customer research and listening to people go, well, so have you got an ISA? Yes. Do you know what the benefits? Well, no, but my mate Barry here's got one, and he said I should have one. That's great. You've got one. You've made that first step.
PLU, keep selling it, PLU.
But it's how do we collectively increase kind of the engagement with personal finances, and particularly kind of for myself, thinking about long-term finances in terms of kind of long-term investing and retirement planning.
Cool, thank you. Tal, you got a comment to go, and then we'll finish with you, Pete.
Yeah, I'm just referring back to these sessions, these workshops that we've been involved in with the Yes You Can initiative. And one of the things that Anna mentioned the other day was that they, after having gone through these workshops, about 40% of those who attend those workshops went out afterwards having not known anything about investing and took some action. So we were having a conversation before we came in here about the depth to which the conversation needs to go to make people take more responsibility for their fate. So one is, I guess, it's an industry imperative that we start to work out how we have those conversations, and how do we have them en masse, because clearly you can't have a one-on-one conversation with millions of people, but how do we do that? Also, just thinking about our own work at Vitality, I mentioned before the digital calculator that we've developed. One of the things it does is to try to help that mindset and change that mindset. So connecting, again, the thinking around, well, how long am I going to live for? What's my life expectancy? And do I have enough savings for that? So what we've found is that people who very often exercise will save 60% more than those who only rarely exercise. So this was a really interesting statistic for us, because it showed the depth of the connection between the way that people look after their physical well-being and their physical future, and also how they're looking after their financial future. So sometimes I think also connecting why you invest, the reason for why you invest, to the actual behaviours, other behaviours that are similar, that require similar kinds of mindsets, will actually also help us to empower people to take responsibility for their own fates.
Perfect, thank you. I think Pete, final comment, and then we'll finish.
Okay,
Cool.
I'll try and be very quick. I think to build on that, not only empower people, but get creative in the way we communicate with people. So pension statements are great because I only receive them once a year. Therefore, I leave it well alone for the rest of the year. But I communicate and receive my pension statement, and it says roughly how much money I might have per year at a point in time in the future that I don't really know about.
No.
Why don't you try coding that into a picture? Tell me what kind of housing I can afford in the kind of postcode that I live in at the moment. Is it the kind of house I find aspirational? Is it the kind of lifestyle that I want? You know, take the maths and convert it into something real and show me the picture.
Yeah.
Let me put myself in that place, and is that the future that I want for myself? And is that going to be my catalyst for making a better decision now? Well, actually, if I increase my savings by 1%, you know, the house gets substantially better. The lifestyle looks much nicer. Well, actually, am I going to make that trade-off for myself now and trade off my happiness today for the happiness I can have 20, 30 years in the future? So I think there's a big creativity piece to go in the top one. The middle one is super simple. Just design your profiling tools well. Do the research. Check that you've done them well. The world of psychometrics is kind of there. It's much better than the old world of profiling questionnaires of people doing portfolio choice that's well and truly messed up by current mood and recent experiences. So good survey design.
Cool. Thank you very much. Well said. Thank you. Then thank you to the panel. Thank you very much, Max, Daniel, Tal, and Pete. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.